She was just a medic in the shadows, until she stopped the bleeding of a nation's hero. Corporal Ava Rios had never liked the center of the frame. If a camera panned across a line of helmets, she'd find a way to stand 2 inches back, half behind someone broader. If a unit photo demanded neat rows, she drifted to the end, anonymous as a comma. She was a field medic because it fit the way her mind worked. Count the breaths, find the pulse, keep the pressure, make the time. The work was about other people's stories, and the job was to make sure those stories didn't end. She carried her aid bag like most people carried their names, easily, habitually, as though it had always been there. The bag smelled like gauze, iodine, dust, and rain, a moving cabinet full of ways to tell blood to stay home. Ava wasn't supposed to be near the front that morning. Her platoon had rotated back to the logistics corridor, a strip of broken road and rusted fence where trucks coughed diesel and interpreters argued with manifests. The map called the village ahead Tarek, though the villagers called it something softer that never made it onto briefing slides. The night before, a sandstorm had moved through and written new rules on every surface. Fine grit found its way into rifle actions and throats. It nested in eyelashes. The sunrise made the ground look like velvet scraped backward by an invisible hand. Ava drank burnt coffee and listened to the day form itself, the clatter of mess kits, a radio testing syllables, a chaplain laughing at a joke too old to be funny. She checked her bag again. Saline, tourniquets, Israeli bandages, occlusive dressings, nasopharyngeal airways, needles, morphine ampoules she wished she'd never need to touch. In the outer pocket, she kept 2 things that never appeared on any list: a paper crane folded by her niece and a strip of blue ribbon that used to hold back her mother's hair. Tiny anchors, small weather. The convoy rolled at 0700. 6 MRAPs, a wrecker, a flatbed with coils of wire, and a single up-armored SUV carrying a visiting dignitary who insisted on seeing the rebuild projects with his own eyes. No one used the word hero in the morning brief, but the way the major spoke made it hang in the air anyway. The man in the SUV had a uniform that mattered to television and to the kind of letters that start with Dear Citizens. He had addressed graduates and comforted families, signed policies, and walked among graves. He shook hands the way people do when they've practiced not to show how much weight they carry. He'd come with a small security detail and the sort of attention that makes plans nervous. The route had been swept, res-wept, watched by a drone that traced lazy ovals over rooftops. The intel cell said low risk, moderate chatter, standard caution. It all sounded like weather. Ava sat behind the driver in the second MRAP, knees braced against the aid bag, helmet strap biting a groove under her jaw. She watched the village resolve into angles, courtyards, blue doors, satellite dishes like metal flowers. A woman hung laundry with the practiced twist of wrists that could tie knots blindfolded. A boy in a Barcelona jersey chased 2 smaller boys with a plastic bottle pretending to be a ball. The air smelled like dust and cardamom and the metallic hint of something that might be rain miles away. For 20 seconds, it almost felt like a commute. The blast unzipped the road at 0719. The SUV lifted on a column of sound and vanished into brown air, then came back down wrong, crooked, a toy dropped by an angry child. Ava's head cracked the seat behind her. Her ears turned the world into cotton. The radio said a lot in 1 second. Contact, smoke, left side, possible complex, stay, stay, stay. A second blast answered somewhere behind, smaller, like a note echoing itself. Ava's driver swore softly, which is what good drivers do when panic would do nothing. The gunner above them pivoted and found nothing to shoot that wouldn't turn into trouble. The convoy's rhythm collapsed into individual arguments with physics. Ava felt her way back into her body. She checked her hands to make sure they remembered being hands. She tasted grit, metal, adrenaline. Rios, her squad leader shouted over the ringing air. She gave him a thumbs up because words had not returned yet. The MRAP's door jerked twice before it decided to open. Heat greeted her first. Heat from the blast. Heat from the day starting its climb. The SUV had taken the brunt. One wheel lay at an anatomically improbable distance. Glass had become confetti, then silt. The dignitary, the man the morning had been built around, was halfway out the rear door, caught by the seatbelt he'd actually worn. The security detail moved with a choreography that could only be learned by braking, But even good drills fail against math. One agent lay very still in a way that meant nothing could help him now. Another knelt beside the open door, one hand on a pistol, the other on a wound at the dignitary's side that poured red with a confidence Ava hated. She ran. Not heroically, practically. Running was a choice the body made to deliver the hands to where they were needed. She slid on glass and found purchase in a patch of sand. "Medic!" someone yelled, and it was only later she realized it had been her own voice. She reached the SUV and saw what the agent's hand was trying to hide. A torn entry high on the right abdomen, an exit wound that had made its own plan lower and back. Shrapnel had traced a cruel line under the rib cage. The bleeding was arterial bright where it wasn't hidden by soaked fabric. The man's eyes were too clear, like someone about to make a rational decision about something irreversible. Ava fell into the tunnel she used when the world's volume had to be turned down. She cut the seatbelt with a hooked blade and slid her hand under his head as they eased him onto the asphalt that was already warming like a griddle. "Sir, I'm Ava," she said, not because he didn't know his own name, but because patience anchor to other people's. "I'm with you. I'm not going anywhere." He tried to speak. She put 2 fingers lightly against his lips. "Save it for later. I need you to breathe slow. In through your nose if you can." She had learned to talk to bodies like stubborn horses, steady, plain, honest. She tore open gauze with her teeth. She pressed hard on the exit wound and felt the language of blood against her palm. "Push, push back, keep." The radio barked about suppression and sectors. The platoon made a circle out of trucks and competence. A drone's camera watched with indifference from the height, where everything looks clean. Someone fired 2 shots south and stopped because the dust had no shoulders to aim at. The boy in the soccer jersey had disappeared. The laundry still moved in the same wind. Ava knelt in the brown, glittering light and tried to convince a hole to become a wall. "I need pressure," she said. A private with hands like shovels folded them over hers. "More," she said. "Pretend it owes you money." He pressed. The bleeding's arrogance humbled. Ava cut away clothing in a careful rectangle because dignity matters even when blood doesn't care. The entry wound bubbled pink. Sucking chest. She snapped open an occlusive dressing and sealed it with the heel of her hand. The dignitary jerked, coughed, swallowed air that didn't want him. "Stay," she said, as if he might wander off. His pupils were even. His skin had gone the wrong shade of tea. She looked at the agent whose knees had dirt ground into them. "I need 2 4-lines," she said, and the agent became an extra pair of hands that didn't ask what or why. Ava slid a catheter into an eager vein, then another into one that argued. "Hang it," she said. "Both." Wide open. The private tore open saline bags like he'd been born to and found gravity with his fists. "Birds 10 minutes," the squad leader shouted. 10 minutes is a lifetime in the back of a blink. Ava looked at the wound again and knew the math was ugly. Pelvic bleed, likely a nicked artery hiding somewhere ribs tried to guard. She could pour the ocean into him and still lose the race. She needed to buy time with something other than fluids. She took a breath. She took another one because the next thing would ask everything from her hands. "I need a clamp," she said. "I need lighting. And I need everyone to stop making noise that isn't necessary." The squad learned a new doctrine instantly. Only the necessary. The agent produced a penlight with a jeweler's exactness. Ava slid 2 fingers into the exit wound, the way a mechanic reaches into an engine without looking, and felt the warm, blind geography of damage. Blood pulsed against her knuckles like a living argument. She followed the pulse to its door. "Got you," she whispered, not to the man, but to the vessel. She slid a hemostat in alongside her finger, hunting by feel, not sight. The penlight painted a small moon on torn tissue. She found the slick edge, the rhythmic insult, and pinched. The world changed key. The bleeding didn't stop. Bleeding never stops like a switch, but it sobered. Pressure became partnership instead of a fist fight. She held the clamp as if it were a promise and not a piece of metal she could drop if someone yelled. "Talk to me, sir," she said, because voice keeps people in rooms. He said his daughter's name. He said it like a man in a photograph. Ava said, "She's going to be mad at you if you miss her graduation," and the absurdity did its work. He smiled with half his mouth, which meant some part of him still had spare electricity. She watched his chest for the count she trusted more than monitors. She timed her own breath to his to trick both bodies into staying. The helicopter's sound found them from somewhere that promised up. The medic on the bird shouted that they'd landed short because the LZ was mean. "We're moving," the squad leader said, and bodies became a stretcher, became a path, became denial of physics. They lifted him as a group that had read the same sentence. Ava kept her fingers where they were because letting go is sometimes betrayal. She crouch-walked, elbow deep in this man's future, toward the wine that meant blades. The rotor wash turned dust into a storm. The world tried to blow away. She kept the clamp steady and the pressure honest. They slid him into the bird. The flight medic's eyes widened at the clamp and then narrowed with respect. "Who placed?" she shouted. "I did," Ava said, not because she wanted credit, but because continuity saves lives. "You're riding," the flight medic said, and Ava climbed past 1,000 regulations into a space that welcomed only need. The helicopter translated distance into minutes. Ava held the clamp while the flight medic turned chaos into protocol. TXA, blood, airway, a monitor that beeped with polite optimism. The crew chief leaned out into the slipstream with a machine gun like a punctuation mark. The flight nurse taped down what could fly and asked Ava, gently, "You good?" Ava nodded. Her forearm burned. The clamp's teeth had her fingerprints now. She looked at the dignitary's face and thought of every photograph she'd seen of him at podiums, hands shaped like bridges over words. He looked nothing like a podium. He looked like someone's father who had fallen in the driveway. She whispered the daughter's name back to him every third breath. The trauma bay met them with fluorescent light and the unison of practiced voices. A surgeon took the clamp like receiving a baton. "Nice work," she said, and Ava didn't know how to store the words. They pulled him into a room that hated bystanders. A nurse touched Ava's elbow and guided her backward. "Water?" the nurse asked, the most humane question in the world. Ava realized her throat was raw and said yes and drank like a lesson. Someone took her name and the story her hands had to tell. Someone else found an empty chair that understood what shock looks like when it wears a uniform. Hours slid. Blood made choices and was coached back. Metal left flesh with the reluctance of tenants. The surgeon emerged with tired hair and clean eyes. "He's alive," she said. "You bought us the minutes the books never promise." Ava nodded because nodding is what you do when all your other verbs feel presumptuous. She texted her squad leader 2 words, "Still here," and he sent back a thumbs up and a photograph of the aid bag sitting on a crate like a dog waiting by the door. News travels the way sound does in thin air. Fast, distorted, relentless. By evening, the base knew the dignitary had been hit. By night, the country knew he'd been saved. Reporters learned the name of the hospital and assigned cameras to the sidewalk. Think pieces grew from soil that had never met the sun of actual detail. A spokesperson at a podium said the words stable and guarded and thanked the medical teams. Someone added, pointedly, a medic on the scene made a critical intervention. They didn't say her name. The omission felt like kindness, a shield made of silence. The silence didn't hold. The dignitary woke the next morning mean with tubes and drugs. He tried to speak and failed and tried again and stole enough air for 3 syllables that didn't need a fourth. "Find her, please." People who are used to being obeyed, even in bedgowns, are dangerous. They found Ava where she was supposed to be, inventorying expired gauze and pretending rest could be accomplished by labeling things. He asked, the liaison said, softer than she probably was at home, "If you'll come." Ava went because you go when the person you pulled back from the wrong edge asks. The room hummed. Machines believed in him. The dignitary's eyes were glazed with pain and gratitude and the mortality that makes all men honest. He lifted a hand that weighed more than it used to. She took it. His skin was cool with the fake cool of air conditioning. "Thank you," he said, gambling the words like a man spending savings. She didn't know what to do with a thank you that big. "Sir," she said, "breathe. Save the speeches for when your daughter can roll her eyes at you for making everything about the country again." He laughed a little and then didn't, because laughing hurts when your insides are negotiating. After that, the story ran ahead of her like a rumor that had discovered legs. A video surfaced of her crouched by the SUV, hands read up to her wrist, lips moving instructions. The internet called her a hero with appetites that felt like weather again, indiscriminate and strong. Her CO asked her, gently, if she wanted to make a statement. She said no. He nodded like a man who has learned the power of small words. The general called for a ceremony and then canceled it, and then scheduled it again because the dignitary insisted on being there in person when he was only technically allowed to sit up. A compromise appeared like compromises do, a modest formation in the chapel that smelled like wood polish, and lives restarted. Ava tried to stand in the back. The chaplain physically moved her forward by degrees, as if adjusting a picture frame that must hang straight. The dignitary entered in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse who understood gratitude better than most elected officials. He was pale with the stubbornness of the newly alive. He asked them not to clap, and they clapped anyway for the nurse, and for the surgeon, and for the entire idea of the day not being a funeral. When the general spoke, he used short words that had more weight than the long ones. "There are kinds of courage we plan for," he said, "and there are kinds we only recognize when we see them." He turned to Ava. Corporal Rios did not improvise today. She executed a plan she has practiced since the first time she bandaged a scraped knee. She found the bleed and told it to stop. She did not raise her voice. She did not ask for permission. She took responsibility. He pinned a medal that would later live in a drawer. She looked down so no one would have to see her eyes. After, the dignitary asked for the microphone he wasn't supposed to have. He managed a smile that looked like a man who had eaten hospital food and survived worse. "I don't remember much," he said, "but I remember a voice with dirt on it telling me to breathe. I remember a hand that didn't shake when mine would have. I will spend the rest of my life trying to live up to the minutes she bought me." He turned to Ava. "If I ever embarrass you by calling you a hero, forgive me. I don't have a better word." She wanted to tell him words are tools that don't always fit, but she just nodded because sometimes peace is agreeing on vocabulary for a day. Life refused to turn into a monument. The next morning, a private split his scalp on the corner of a tailgate and bled like a bad myth. Ava glued him back together while he told a story about a dog that could open the fridge. A week later, she sat in the dirt beside a woman in Tarek and coached a baby into the world like catching a small bird. The blue ribbon finally tore after years of service, and she tucked it into her pocket, retired with honors. At night, sometimes, the clamp returned to her hand in dreams. She would wake with her fingers pinching air and have to teach them it was okay to let go. She never Googled herself. Emma did and sent screenshots filtered through sisterly rage, praising the good, laughing at the bad, blocking the worst. "You stopped the bleeding," Emma texted. "Anyone who wants more from you can go bleed on someone else." Once, months later, on a morning like a clean plate, the dignitary returned to the region. He made a point of visiting the clinic first. He walked slowly but with a patience that looked like strength reassembled. He didn't bring cameras into the exam bay. That felt like a secret gift to everyone present. He shook hands the way people do who now value palms and knuckles differently. He found Ava between two beds checking pupils with a penlight. He waited until she had finished and until the soldier she was treating had said, "I can see your fingers, ma'am." And only then did he speak. "How are you?" he asked. "Hydrated," she said. He laughed. "Good." He looked for something wise and found instead something honest. "I think about that clamp," he said quietly, not like a confession, but like putting a stone down. "I think about the fact that you didn't freeze." Ava shook her head. "I don't know if I didn't. I was too busy to find out." He nodded. Silence sat with them for a few comfortable seconds. He squeezed her shoulder once, a thank you that acknowledged there would never be enough thank yous. Then he left because people like him belong to time slots. On the anniversary, the base did what it always does. It worked. There were no speeches, just a box of stale donuts someone left in the clinic and a sticky note in Sharpie for the hands that hold the line. Ava ate half a maple bar and saved the other half for after a stitch job she already knew would require 3 tries. She walked outside and let the sun have her for a minute. Engines made the kind of music you don't notice until it's gone. In the distance, laundry moved on the same line as that day, and a new boy in a too-big jersey kicked a real ball against a wall that still had shrapnel stories in it. The map still called the village Tarek. The villagers still called it something softer. Sometimes, at night, she sat on the edge of her bunk and opened the small tin where she kept 2 personal things. The paper crane, the blue ribbon, now in 2 pieces. A disposable clamp she'd pocketed from a resupply box as a joke to herself. Not the clamp, of course, never that one, but a reminder that tools become sacred when you use them right. She'd hold the clamp up to the light. Imagine the artery again, Feel her fingers making a small gate in a flood. She'd think of the line between ordinary and extraordinary, how thin it is until you trip over it. She'd think about how much of medicine is listening and how much of courage is deciding out loud. If you ask her what she did that day, she won't tell you she saved a hero. She will say she did her job. She will say she kept a promise to the people who sent their sons and daughters across an ocean with the understanding that someone would be there with a bag and steady hands. She will say she found the bleeding and told it to stop. And if you press, if you insist on a big word, she will forgive you your need for statues, even as she goes back to the shadows where the work lives. Because the shadows are not where she hides. The shadows are where the light needs to be carried by hand. She was just a medic in the shadows, until the moment the nation's story started leaking onto a road and would not stop. She pressed, she clamped, she counted breaths. She bought minutes with pain and focus. She gave a father back to a daughter and a public figure back to a public that did not deserve him and did, because that is how countries work. She will deny the word hero until the word grows up. And when she dreams, sometimes the clamp is still in her hand, and she wakes not afraid, but grateful that, once, when it mattered, her fingers remembered exactly what to do. In the weeks that followed, paperwork tried to put the day into boxes. Investigators drew arrows on diagrams that could never know what dust feels like in teeth. A colonel interviewed Ava with the solicitude of a man who has forgotten how to sit, and when she answered plainly, he kept looking at her hands, as if they could reveal a secret technique he might requisition. She told him there was no secret: pressure, clamp, patience. He wrote down all three as if they were rare metals. Back at the clinic, the rhythm insisted on returning. Boots tracked mud. Fevers spiked and broke. Someone sprained an ankle on a staircase that had sprained thousands. Ava explained to a lance corporal, sweating, embarrassed, that anxiety can make hearts race faster than sprinting, and she taught him square breathing in the shadow of a supply shelf. He returned 3 days later and said, "It worked. Also, I told my brother. He says you saved a senator. I told him you saved my Tuesday." She filed the sentence away with the important things. A letter arrived from the dignitary's daughter, handwriting the color of the sea. It was short and exact. "You don't know me. I know you held my father's life and decided to keep it. I have no gift big enough. Please accept an IOU for anything I can do in 20 years. Ava laughed when she read it, and then cried, and then tucked the letter into the tin with the crane. She wondered what the girl would be in 20 years: scientist, pianist, stubborn neighbor, and hoped, fiercely, that the promise would expire unused. The day the dignitary left the hospital, he insisted on walking to the curb. Cameras tried to make it a coronation. He made it a commute. He paused only once, to take the hand of a janitor who had propped open a door with a yellow wedge that squeaked. "Thank you," he said, and the man looked confused until the dignitary added, "for making sure I could find my way out." Later, a columnist would turn the moment into a metaphor and miss that it had simply been gratitude passing through the closest available conduit. At the base, the general sent Ava on enforced leave, 3 days that tasted like a dare. She went to town, ate pancakes at a diner that only played songs older than she was, and let the waitress add whipped cream without arguing. She bought a pair of socks with tiny sharks on them because life, occasionally, is about being ridiculous on purpose. She took a bus to the library and sat in the coolness between stacks, reading an old paperback about mountains. The quiet was not empty. It was occupied by all the noise she had turned down in her head. She practiced not turning it back up. On the second day, she visited the little clinic in Tarek with 2 duffel bags of supplies balanced against her thigh. The midwife, Nasreen, met her at the door with eyebrows that traveled before the rest of her face. "You bring gifts," Nasreen said, half teasing, half fierce. "You bring work," Ava answered, and they laughed like women who have carried other people's weight for a long time. They sorted the supplies onto shelves that were really old fruit crates. A girl wandered in with her little brother trailing, his knuckles scabbed, his eyes too observant. "Ball," he said, and held up the taped leather of a once soccer ball. Ava patched it with vinyl from a broken blood pressure cuff and a square of tape she knew would fail someday. He kicked it anyway and called it fixed. At night, Ava slept and dreamed of ordinary catastrophes: the leaky faucet of a wound that refuses to seal, The phone with a cracked screen that still delivers a text from Emma at the exact right moment. Proud of you. Eat something green. She woke and ate a cucumber like a dare and sent a photo as proof. Emma replied with a string of lettuce emojis that made no nutritional sense. The medal arrived with paperwork that used the word valor as if it could be pinned. She signed for the box and put it in the drawer. The chaplain asked gently if she'd like to display it in the clinic. No, she said, but thank you. He nodded, then taped a copy of the crisis hotline above the sink, because tending souls is not a competition, it's an inventory. Before he left, he said, "You know the thing about heroes?" And didn't wait for an answer. They're just people who decide not to postpone decency. She thought about the clamp and the way the artery had argued, and decided decency sometimes needs leverage. Not everyone was kind. A talk show host suggested the dignitary had been foolish to travel. A commenter wrote that Ava had no business putting a clamp where a surgeon belonged. Her CO emailed her 2 sentences that could have been carved in granite. You were there. You were trained. You were right. She printed the email and stuck it inside the tin with the ribbon because even stone needs a container. On a slow afternoon, the sim instructor kept his old promise and waved her into the bay. No publicity, he warned, but his smile betrayed a complicity she liked. He strapped her into a seat that pretended to be a cockpit and gave her a checklist shorter than the real one and twice as kind. The screen poured sky at her. He taught her how to bank without scaring the imaginary passengers in the back. When she nailed a landing that felt like setting a glass down on a table without making a sound, he tapped the console twice with a knuckle. "You have hands," he said. And she said, "Everyone does." And he said, "Not like this." And they let the compliment hang where no one could trip over it. When the dignitary finally returned to the capital, he sent a note through channels that usually carried budget requests. "Please convey to Corporal Rios that my physicians argue about the moment I would have been beyond reclamation. I argue that the moment did not come because she did not permit it. I am indebted." It was the kind of sentence that would embarrass her every time she remembered it. She repeated only one fragment to Emma, because she did not permit it. "Put that on a t-shirt," Emma texted. "Actually, put it on your heart." Summer bled into fall. The sun learned a gentler angle. A new batch of medics arrived, their boots too clean, their faces alert with the hunger of people who want to be good at something that matters. Ava taught them how to roll pressure dressings with their thumbs, how to talk to pain like it owes rent, how to look at a scene and find the 3 things that will matter in 10 minutes. She never mentioned the dignitary. She talked about a private named Ellis whose nose bled for reasons that had nothing to do with war, and a mechanic named Joe who would not admit he was allergic to the base cat. She told them how to write down a patient's last sentence correctly, because sometimes that is the only gift you can deliver to a family. One evening, a dust devil chased a plastic bag across the motor pool and made everyone laugh with the relief of a joke that doesn't cost anyone anything. Ava sat on the tailgate of a truck and watched the sky agree with itself. The general walked by with his hands behind his back like a man who knows his pockets too well. He paused. "How is your sleep?" he asked. "I wake up sometimes," she said. "Me too," he said, and looked almost apologetic, as if he should be able to fix every dream on post with an order. "If you ever need a door that can be knocked on," he said, "mine is." She believed him. She did not knock. It was enough to know which would open. On a holiday nobody celebrated sincerely, Ava and Nasreen organized an immunization day in Tarek. They set up in the shade of a date palm and bribed small arms with candy. The dignitary's daughter's letter fell out of Ava's pocket when she reached for a vial. Nasreen picked it up, read the first line, and tucked it back without comment. Later, she said, "American letters are like our tea. Too sweet, and somehow exactly what you need." Ava laughed and tried to remember the last time she had let herself need anything. Winter brought a border of frost to metal at dawn. The clinic smelled like menthol and sweat. A soldier with a cough tried to hide it because he didn't want to be pulled from patrol. Ava listened to his chest, heard the crackle of a small storm, and told him, kindly, to sit this one out. He glared at the floor in the universal language of thwarted duty, then came back a week later with flowers stolen from the landscaping near HQ and placed them in a paper cup like an apology. "You were right," he said. "Breathing is better than glory." "Some days," she said, and they both smiled because it was all the days. On the first day of the new year, Ava took the medal out of the drawer, looked at it for a full minute, then put it back. She didn't feel guilty. She felt consistent. She pinned, instead, the blue ribbon, now frayed, inside the aid bag where only she would see it. She whispered to the bag the way you talk to a stubborn friend. Let's keep promising. The bag said nothing, but it felt lighter in her hand. A photography unit came through to document daily life. A sergeant asked to take her picture while she was teaching a private how to tape an ankle. No faces, she said. Hands only. The photograph later hung in a hallway. 2 pairs of hands, one steady, one learning, a strip of blue ribbon just visible like a vein. People paused without knowing why. They felt calmer after. The chaplain said it was because the picture proved competence exists. Years later, because time will insist, Ava would leave the service quietly. She would teach emergency medicine in a city that knows too much about sirens. She would tape a copy of the crisis hotline above her new sink out of habit. Sometimes, in the middle of a classroom full of teenagers who believed in immortality on Tuesdays and feared everything on Wednesdays, she would pause and say, "Attention is a form of love." They would laugh the way students always have when adults say something true too cleanly. Some would remember. One would write it on her wrist in ink during a test and claim it helped. And sometimes, when a news anchor would mention the dignitary, older now, slower, still filling rooms with an ethics that had not dimmed, Ava would catch a glimpse of his hand on a podium and remember it under hers, slick and human and attached to a life that continued because a clamp held long enough for a plane to land. She would change the channel to a cooking show where someone made rice perfectly and feel, unexpectedly, at peace. If you ask her now, in the language of anniversaries and edits, what the story is, she will say it is not the explosion or the clamp or the metal. It is the way a platoon became quiet when quiet was required. It is the way a private's hands learned pressure in a single afternoon. It is a nurse saying water, and a surgeon saying nice work, and a chaplain taping a phone number above a sink. It is a letter from a daughter, a patched soccer ball, a photograph of hands. It is a nation bodied forth in a single person who didn't get to die that day, and a medic who chose the smaller word, stay. And if you push her to summarize, for your channel, your docuseries, your plaque, she will sigh and offer the only line that feels like both instruction and prayer: find the bleeding. Tell it to stop. Hold until help has hands.